I wonder if you can help me figure out his Dark Materials and the Book of Dust. So I first read Northern Lights way back in 1997 when I was 11, so the same age as Lyra in Northern Lights. I loved it back then, and I've loved it ever since. I also enjoyed The Subtle Knife, a bit less, because suddenly there was this boy, Will, and Lyra was meant to be the main character, and here was this boy barging in. But I still enjoyed The Subtle Knife. It just didn't feel the masterpiece and wonder of Northern Lights. And then what felt like an age of a wait until the Amber Spyglass was published in 2000 when I was probably 14. And I remember even the first time that I read it, I struggled with the pacing. It went a bit floppy in the middle, especially with the Mary Malone bits when she was in the Malefa world. It just seemed to drag a bit, and my brain doesn't deal with descriptive writing too well. It just sort of shuts off. And so it's like when Richard Osman said in the Rest is Entertainment podcast that if you start to describe a hedge for 3 pages, then you're going to lose him. And I've always felt the same sort of way, especially about more literary fiction, when it just describes the sky for absolutely ages, and that's meant to be a metaphor for the things happening in the book, and that's just not for me. I don't enjoy that. Then the Amber Spyglass felt a lot more preachy and heavy-handed, and it felt like the author, Philip Pullman, was taking over and just forcing his views upon you, which is fair enough, it's his book. But the problem for me was that it was a bit confusing and it didn't quite all fit together and make sense. So now I've just re-listened to his Dark Materials for the first time in maybe even 2 decades, and I've also listened to the first 2 books in the Book of Dust for the first time ever, in preparation for the 3rd Book of Dust being published later this month, which I'm now really excited for. But there are some things that I'm still struggling to understand, and I was wondering if you could help me out. And there are also some things which I have opinions on. So a pet peeve of mine is when in stories, when a girl or woman has some sort of power, magic, all through the story, and then she has to sacrifice that, or those powers are taken away from her in some way by the end of the book, and so at the end she's left without them. And so at the end of the Amber Spyglass, Lyra loses her ability to use the alethiometer, and I always hated this. But I mean, there was a reason given within the text, but then that didn't make sense, because if she lost that ability because she grew up, you know, in that moment when she fell in love with Will, then the same power that she used to use the alethiometer, getting in that state of mind, that relaxed state of mind, is the same state of mind you got in to use the subtle knife, that Will used to use the subtle knife. And yet Will, when he grew up in that moment and the dust settled and the demons became settled in their form, and so they were supposedly now grown-ups, he was still able to use the subtle knife. So the girl lost her power, but the boy was somehow able to keep his power, even though the same thing had happened to them. And it wasn't logical, which made me angry. And yes, I just loved the alethiometer in general. It was just devastating for Lyra to lose her ability to do that. So yes, that was a bit of a sticking point for me. Another thing that confuses me is that all the dust was increasingly flowing fast out of all the universes, and it wasn't just because of the windows that the subtle knife had cut, even though they had to go and close all those windows. All the witches and angels and things had to close those windows. That wasn't the main thing that was causing the increasing flow. And it was when Lyra and Will kissed and supposedly grew up in that and became adults in that moment, or teens or whatever, that stopped the dust flowing outwards and caused it to go back to what it used to be, which was falling downwards like snowflakes to the seed pods, which had always faced upwards. And since the dust had changed, the trees were dying because they could no longer gather the dust because it wasn't falling in, because the seed pods were faced the wrong way. But the thing that I don't understand is that lots of people fall in love and lots of people grow up, but that wasn't changing the flow of dust. It was specifically Lyra and Will in that moment. And I know there was the prophecy of Lyra being called the second Eve, but why would that have made a difference? We were never really told why Lyra and Will were so special and why it was their love that caused to save the dust and save the universes. And then, of course, what is dust? I remember thinking from the first book, it seemed like Philip Pullman was saying dust was sin, and then it kind of changed later on to be consciousness or awareness. But then he also said it's dark matter or antimatter. And then with Mary Malone, the dust communicated with her through her machine and said that dust was angels. So angels are dark matter, dark energy, which is not at all the same as what consciousness is in a human. Humans aren't angels. It's very confusing. If you could help me out there, I would be very grateful. And I was also always had that level of uncomfortableness, and I didn't have the vocabulary for it back when I was 11, but now I'm thinking it was this old male author, and it seemed like he was sort of sexualizing a child, Lyra, a young girl on the cusp of adolescence, and it was always felt off to me and not right. And it didn't, and also when I was a bit older, it didn't ring true to what growing up is. It's not like a sudden, you don't just grow up in one moment, it's a gradual thing. So none of it rang true for me with reality. And I wasn't altogether sure what he was trying to say about God. I mean, I know he's an atheist, but so angels existed in his dark materials, and the person that everyone thought was God turned out to be just the first angel, and were tyrants, though some of the angels were tyrants. And then, of course, the magisterium was the human-made institution of religion, which was evil and obsessed with control and power. So on the one hand, while trying to say these things don't exist, he was also making a world where angels and things did exist. So it was quite confusing. And then, so I've just finished the first two books of the Book of Dust, Belle, Sauvage and The Secret Commonwealth. I really enjoyed the first one, La Belle Sauvage, which was the backstory of Lyra when she was a baby, and I actually really enjoyed that, and Malcolm in that. But coming into The Secret Commonwealth, it made me extremely uncomfortable to start this sort of hints of romantic feelings between Malcolm and Lyra. Now, Malcolm had looked after Lyra when she was a baby and he was 11. It gave me the creeps again of an old male author putting this huge age gap relationship onto a young girl, and it just doesn't sit right. And then later on there was the sexual assault of Lyra as well. So Lyra is now 20 in this book, and it's just devastating because everything that she went through in Northern Lights to avoid intercision of being severed from her demon, which is the soul, her own soul. It appears that when she separated from Pantalaimon, when she had to go into the world of the dead, has done something similar. But I'm guessing it's not the same thing, because when people were severed and with the intercision, they turned into sort of lifeless automatons. And Lyra definitely isn't lifeless in this story. She's intellectually very curious, and she's got into more academic interests, and she's curious about different life philosophies and investigating them, and she's been particularly struck by two of those philosophies, but this is seen as very bad by Pantalaimon, her demon, and he says that she's completely lost her imagination and sense of wonder. And there has been for a while this growing hatred between Lyra and Pantalaimon, her demon, and it's just so sad because it appears that it has been sort of, I don't know if severed is the right word, her connection with her own soul, which I'm guessing sort of represents self-hatred, because if your demon is your soul and you hate your soul, it's hating yourself, isn't it? So Pantalaimon leaves Lyra and goes in search of her imagination. And we still don't really know what dust is. So when the dust field around a person and their demon, there's a connection of dust flowing from the person to their demon. And when that was severed through indecision, that bond was cut. But I don't know what happens or the difference with separation and if it can be reversed. I'm really hoping it can, because I want a happy ending and for Lyra to be whole again with Pan. And I'm hoping a lot will be revealed about dust in the 3rd book that's coming out very soon now. So I'm looking forward to that and hoping you can help me understand some of the stuff that I already mentioned. But I always did like that it was complex and it didn't talk down to you. And I remember when I was 14 reading the Amber Spyglass and talking about quantum entanglement within that, and I actually knew a bit about like that, and I'd read articles about the Higgs boson and stuff in the newspaper magazines on Sundays, so I found it all very fascinating. But I just don't know what Philip Pullman is trying to say in this new Book of Dust trilogy, because it seems to be the very opposite of what he was saying in his Dark Materials. His Dark Materials was science, rationality, nothing else exists apart from that, and that you can't be silly and believe in silly things. But he seems to be saying the exact opposite in the Book of Dust, in that there's this other world, the secret Commonwealth of fairies and all these folklore type creatures, and it's presented as it's a problem that Lyra has stopped believing in these sorts of things and only believes in what is rational, and she's lost her sense of imagination or belief in the magic of the world, the wonder of the world, its aliveness, and that something else exists beyond it, and that there is meaning in it, and that it's a problem that Lyra has lost this, which seems to be the very opposite message of his Dark Material. So just help me out here. What's Philip Pullman trying to say in both? And are you looking forward to the conclusion of this trilogy of the Book of Dust?